Questions 21 to 30, the science passage on the reading of College Board's Test 3. So question 21 to 30, passage 3 is going to be the science passage. As we're about to read, this passage is adapted from Thor Hansen Feathers. Scientists have long debated how the ancestors of birds evolved the ability to fly. So this passage is going to be questioning the evolution of birds and better understanding how scientists have figured out how birds flew, how they first started to fly. The ground up theory, so we're defining a lot of terminology in this blurb right now of the science passage. So we need to pay particular attention when they're defining stuff because that's going to be vital for our understanding of the passage. The ground up theory assumes they were fleet-footed ground dwellers that captured prey by leaping and flapping their upper limbs. So the ground up theory assumes that birds started to fly by being on the ground first, and they would jump up and use their muscles in order to capture prey, eventually maintaining the ability to fly. The tree down theory assumes that there were tree climbers that leapt and glided among branches. So that's the tree down theory. Instead of the ground up theory, the tree down theory states that birds would climb into trees and they would glide. You know, it'd be like a paper airplane, just like gliding from tree to tree. And eventually they would gain their muscle mass in order to maintain flight. So this is all about the history of how birds began to fly. Remember, science passages are very objective by nature. They are telling us the facts, and they're providing us with details about a particular field, experiments, scientific thought and inquiry, expert opinion. Those are going to be the things that we have to pay attention to in these passages. I think that the science passages are the most straightforward passages on this test, just like the social science. They don't have a lot of, they're not complex, they're not trying to trick us, but I think the hard part about them is maintaining a bunch of different pieces of data and facts in your head simultaneously, and not allowing the test makers to convince you to believe something that just wasn't said, or something that's just not substantiated by the text that you just read. So with that in mind, let's just understand this passage from the perspective of someone trying to just tell us facts. They're just telling us a story based on facts and experiments. And if we can remember what those facts and experiments were, we'll be fine. So let's read. At field sites around the world, Ken Dials saw a pattern in how young pheasants, quails, tinamous, and other ground birds ran along behind their parents. They jumped up like popcorn. So this guy, he saw patterns in how young birds acted. They jumped up, he said, describing how they would flap their half-formed wings and take short hops in the air. So, when a group of graduate students challenged him to come up with new data on the age-old ground-up, tree-down debate. So when I guess his graduate students kind of not challenged him, not like we challenge you to do this, but kind of just like, hey, come up with your own theory. Come up with your own data on this debate. Have birds evolved from the ground up or from tree down? He designed a project to see what clues might lie in how baby game birds learn to fly. So he's maintaining his position to understand how birds evolved from understanding how baby birds develop their skills. Ken settled on the chukar partridge as a model species. So this is, I guess, just like a species that he can use to model a lot of other species. But he might not have made his discovery without a key piece of advice from the local rancher in Montana who was supplying him with the birds. That's interesting. He picked this bird, but he might not have made his discovery without a key piece of information that a farmer or a rancher told him. When the cowboy stopped by to see how things were going, Ken showed him his nice, tidy laboratory setup and explained how the bird's first hops and flights would be measured. The rancher was incredulous. Incredulous means like he didn't believe what he saw. He took one look and said, in pretty colorful language, "What are those birds doing on the ground? They hate to be on the ground. Give them something to climb on." So the rancher, who knows these birds firsthand, saw the setup that Ken had, and he said, "Why are the birds on the ground? The birds don't like to be on the ground. They like to climb on things." So this was kind of, I guess, going right in the face of what Ken thought, that he wanted to find, just like birds when they first were forming, he saw they would jump up like the children, the baby chicks would jump up like popcorn, he said in line 4. How they would try to flap up and try to fly from the ground. So he automatically started his base assumption that, well, we'll put the birds on the ground for my experiment. The rancher, though, says, hey, they don't like to be on the ground. At first, it seemed unnatural. Ground birds don't like the ground? That's like this is a question. Like at first, this seems counterintuitive. But, so this is the reversal. This is the enlightenment, the understanding of why this is true. As he thought about it, Ken realized that all the species he'd watched in the wild prefer to rest on ledges, low branches, or other elevated perches where they were safe from predators. So birds don't like to be on the ground. They like to be in a vantage that allows them to not get eaten by predators. They really only use the ground for feeding and traveling. So he brought in some hay bales for the chukars to perch on, and then left his son in charge of feeding and data collection while he went away on a short work trip. Barely a teenager at the time, young Terry Dial was visibly upset when his father got back, so this kid was upset. I asked him how it went, Ken recalled, and he said, terrible, the birds are cheating. Okay? Instead of flying up to their perches, the baby chukars were using their legs. So instead of thinking that they would fly up to their little, again, the ground up theory, right? Slowly developing their muscles in order to fly up to a ledge. These babies were using their legs. Time and again, Terry had watched them run right up to the side of a hail bay, flapping all the while. Ken dashed out to see for himself, and that was the aha moment. The birds were using their wings and legs cooperatively. So again, I guess Terry, the young kid, was thinking in terms of a binary relationship of all or nothing. Either they flew up, or either they're going to fly up or they're not. And he was disappointed when they weren't. He's saying, like, this doesn't make any sense. But what are these birds actually doing? Ken says that they were using their wings and legs cooperatively together. They're using their wings as well as their legs together in some type of harmonious motion. And this single observation opened up a world of possibilities. Working together with Terry, who has since gone on to study animal locomotion, Ken came up with a series of ingenious experiments, filming the birds as they raced up textured ramps. So Ken came up with a series of ingenious experiments, and he would film the birds as they raced up textured ramps, tilted at increasing angles. As the incline increased, the partridges began to flap. So as the incline increased, I guess as the thing got steeper and steeper for them to climb up, the partridges began to flap, but they angled their wings differently from birds in flight when they were climbing. They aimed their flapping down and backwards, using the force not for lift. They're using the force not for lift, but to keep their feet firmly pressed against the ramp. Interesting. So they weren't using it for flight, for lift. They're using it actually to plant themselves as gravity is causing a further force on their body. It's like the spoiler on the back of a race car, he explains, which is a very apt analogy. In Formula One, great sport, spoilers are the big aerodynamic fins. So spoilers are in the back of the car that push the cars downward as they speed along. So the faster they go, the more downward pressure is exerted from the air behind it, increasing traction and handling. The birds were doing the very same thing. That's what the birds were doing. Instead of flapping for lift, they were actually flapping for downforce. The birds were doing the very same thing with their wings to help them scramble up otherwise impossible slopes. So otherwise, if they were just climbing with their legs, they wouldn't be able to climb up these steep gradients. With the downward flapping that would plant their feet, they were able to get more traction and more force down on the surface. Ken called the technique WAIR for wing-assisted incline running, and went on to document it in a wide range of species. So a lot of species do this. It not only allowed young birds to climb vertical surfaces within the first few weeks of life, but also what? Gave adults an energy-efficient alternative to flying. Interesting. So this was documented not only for baby birds in order to climb vertical surfaces, right? In order to climb things that seem impossible due to gravity, but it also gave adults an energy-efficient alternative. In the chukar experiments, adults regularly used WAIR to ascend ramps steeper than 90 degrees, essentially running up the wall and onto the ceiling. So they're able to use their flapping in order to push themselves Spider-Man-like on vertical surfaces or even more. That they're able to use this to create more downward force, more than that of gravity, using the surface as a support. Interesting. In an evolutionary context, now we get to the evolutionary question, which is exactly what scientists have long been debating. In an evolutionary context, WAIR takes on surprising explanatory powers. With one fell swoop, the dials came up with a viable origin for the flapping flight stroke of birds, something gliding animals don't do, and thus a shortcoming of the tree down theory. So, okay, this is complex. With a viable origin for the flapping flight of strokes, something gliding, so they were able to come up with the flapping flight stroke of birds through the use of downward force planting themselves on inclines. And this is something gliding animals don't do, and thus a shortcoming of the tree down theory. This is something that better supports the ground up theory. And an aerodynamic function for half-formed wings, one of the main drawbacks of the ground up hypothesis. So it's almost like we're using both theories to come up with a reconciliation. That it might be both. That birds might have started to fly in part by using the flapping flight motions in order to plant their wings and plant their feet firmly on the ground, something that the tree down theory doesn't account for if you're just gliding using your wings as kind of airplane wings. And an aerodynamic function for half-formed wings. But we also get the idea for why half-formed wings work to begin with, which might explain it might not be powerful enough in order to create downforce or in order to jump, but it might be good enough to explain why birds would glide or fly or get up to a location, a high perched area that allows them to swoop down. So it's almost a little bit of both. We are able to take our findings from this experiment and apply it to both theories to come up with a plausible explanation that it might have been a combination of the two methods, ground up and tree down. So with that said, let's take a look at the questions.